The button hit the floor before anyone spoke. It rolled beneath table 7, circled once on the polished wood, then stopped beside a woman's expensive cream-colored heel. Emily Carter stood perfectly still. One hand held the edge of her serving tray. The other rested against the torn seam of her navy apron. Around her, Maple and Maine had gone strangely quiet. Forks hovered above plates. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Even the old espresso machine seemed louder now, hissing behind the counter while rain tapped steadily against the front windows. Vanessa Whitmore stared at Emily as though the ruined apron were somehow Emily's fault. "Maybe next time you'll remember who you're speaking to," she said. Emily looked down. The apron wasn't worth much. $20, perhaps less. The fabric had faded after years of washing, and one pocket leaned slightly because Margaret, the diner's owner, had repaired it by hand long ago. But Emily remembered the morning she first tied it around her waist. 10 years earlier. $29 in her checking account. Rent due Friday. No certainty about what came next. Margaret had handed her that apron and said, "Everybody deserves a place to start." Emily had never forgotten. Now one of its buttons rested beneath a stranger's shoe. Noah, the 17-year-old busboy working his first week, bent instinctively to retrieve it. Emily stopped him with a small gesture. "It's okay," she said softly. Her voice didn't shake. Vanessa gave a short, humorless laugh. "Of course it's okay. It's an apron." Emily raised her eyes. Calm. Clear. "That isn't what I meant." Something shifted in the room. Vanessa noticed it too. She straightened the sleeve of her designer coat and glanced around, suddenly aware that people were watching. "Don't make this dramatic," she said. "You're the one who embarrassed me in front of everyone." Emily's fingers loosened from the torn fabric. "I asked you not to speak to Noah that way. He spilled water near my purse. He apologized, and then you decided to lecture me." Emily glanced toward Noah. His face was red, his eyes fixed on the floor. Then she looked back at Vanessa. "I asked you to treat him like a person." Vanessa's expression hardened. "You people always do this." Emily said nothing. Vanessa stepped closer. "You think because you carry plates all day, everyone owes you some kind of sympathy." Still, Emily didn't raise her voice. She simply bent down, reached beneath the table, and picked up the button herself. She held it in her palm for a moment, brushing away a speck of dust with her thumb. Then the bell above the diner door rang. Cold August rain whispered in from the sidewalk as a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped inside, closing a black umbrella behind him. Daniel Carter had spent the morning in meetings where people waited for him to speak before they dared interrupt. Here, no one noticed him at first. His attention had already crossed the room. He saw Emily. He saw the torn apron. He saw the button in her hand. And the easy warmth that usually appeared in his face whenever he found her was gone. Daniel walked forward slowly. Vanessa turned, irritation ready on her lips, then froze when she recognized him. Daniel Carter, founder of Carter Hospitality Group, a man whose name appeared on buildings, business magazines, and contracts worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. But Daniel never looked at Vanessa. His eyes remained on Emily. "Who did this?" he asked quietly. Emily met his gaze across the silent diner, and for the first time that afternoon, the strength in her expression softened. 2 days earlier, Emily Carter had arrived at Maple and Maine at 6:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before her shift and long before the lunch crowd would fill every booth. The diner smelled of fresh coffee, toasted bread, and the lemon cleaner Margaret Collins had used on the counter since Emily could remember. Nothing about the place was fashionable. The red vinyl seats had small cracks near the edges. The brass bell above the entrance sometimes rang twice when the door opened once. Booth 7 leaned slightly toward the window. Emily loved all of it. She tied her navy apron around her waist and checked the front pocket. Order pad. 2 pens. A folded receipt from the previous shift. Ordinary things from an ordinary job. 10 years earlier, even ordinary had felt like a luxury. Emily had been 19 then, standing outside this same diner on a cold November morning with $29 in her checking account and rent due before the weekend. She had walked 3 blocks carrying a resume that looked painfully empty. College had been postponed. Bills had not. Maple and Maine had been the 4th restaurant she visited that morning. Margaret had been behind the counter pouring coffee when Emily asked whether they were hiring. Experience? Margaret had asked. Emily had swallowed. Not much. Can you show up on time? Yes. Can you listen? Yes. Margaret studied her for another second. Then you can learn the rest. There had been no speech about charity. No sympathetic look. Margaret simply handed her a navy apron and pointed toward the coffee station. Emily remembered that kindness because it had preserved something more important than her pride. It had preserved her dignity. On her third shift, one of the apron buttons came loose. Margaret repaired it during her break with dark blue thread from a sewing kit kept beneath the register. "Everybody deserves a place to start," she had said, clipping the thread with tiny silver scissors. Emily never forgot the words. Years passed. Her life changed in ways the 19-year-old version of herself could never have predicted. The overdue rent disappeared. The nervous calculations at grocery store registers disappeared. Even the little apartment where she once listened to the radiator knock through winter belonged to another chapter now. But every Tuesday, Emily returned to Maple and Main. Some customers assumed she needed the money. Others never wondered about her at all. Emily preferred the second group. Here, nobody cared about photographs in business magazines or the last name printed on invitations she rarely attended. Here, Margaret still told her when table 4 needed more coffee. Noah still asked where the clean glasses belonged. The cook still complained when someone ordered eggs after noon. Emily could simply be Emily. That morning, Margaret watched her straighten the old apron and shook her head. "You know I have newer ones in the back." Emily touched the repaired button with her thumb. "I know. That thing belongs in a museum." Emily smiled. "Then charge admission." Margaret laughed and returned to the register. Emily picked up the coffee pot as the first customers entered. The little brass bell rang twice. Morning light spread across the worn floor. And for another quiet Tuesday, no one walking through that door had any reason to imagine that the waitress pouring their coffee went home each night to a life very different from the one they saw. The button struck the floor before anyone found the courage to speak. It spun beneath table 7, flashed once under the warm diner lights, then settled beside Vanessa Whitmore's cream-colored heel. Emily Carter did not move. Her serving tray remained balanced in one hand, while the other slowly touched the torn seam of her navy apron. Around her, Maple and Main seemed to forget how to breathe. A fork stopped against a plate. Someone lowered a coffee cup without taking a sip. Behind the counter, the espresso machine released a thin hiss into the silence. Outside, August rain traced silver lines down the windows. Vanessa looked at the damaged apron, then at Emily, as though the whole thing were beneath discussion. "Maybe now you will remember who you are talking to," she said. Emily lowered her eyes toward the button on the floor. The apron itself was not valuable. It was old, faded from years of washing, with one pocket that never sat quite straight. But some things carried a price that could not be printed on a tag. Noah Bennett, the 17-year-old busboy standing a few feet away, started to bend down for the button. Emily stopped him with a small motion of her hand. "It is all right, Noah." Her voice was soft. "Steady." Vanessa gave a dry laugh. "Exactly. It is an apron. You can replace it." Emily looked up. "That is not what I meant." The room became quieter. Vanessa noticed the faces turned toward them and straightened the sleeve of her designer coat. "Do not turn this into some performance. You embarrassed me first. I asked you not to humiliate him." Emily glanced toward Noah. His cheeks were red, his eyes fixed on the floor. "He spilled water near my purse," Vanessa replied. "And he apologized. Then you decided to lecture me." Emily's fingers released the torn fabric. "I asked you to treat him like a person." Vanessa stared at her for a long second. "You people always think everyone owes you sympathy." Emily did not answer. That silence seemed to irritate Vanessa more than an argument would have. "You carry plates for a living," she continued. "Do not pretend you understand how the real world works." Emily finally bent down and retrieved the button herself. She brushed a speck of dust from its edge with her thumb and closed her fingers around it. "Maybe the real world would be easier," she said quietly, "if people stopped deciding someone's value by the job they happen to be doing." Vanessa opened her mouth, but the brass bell above the entrance rang first. Cool rain whispered through the doorway as a tall man stepped inside, closing a black umbrella behind him. His charcoal suit was darkened slightly at the shoulders from the weather. He paused near the entrance. Daniel Carter had spent his morning in conference rooms where executives watched his expression before making decisions worth millions of dollars. But none of that mattered now. His attention crossed the diner and found Emily. He saw the torn apron, the button enclosed in her hand, Noah's lowered head. Vanessa standing in front of her. The familiar warmth in Daniel's face disappeared. He walked toward them, slowly enough that the sound of his shoes carried across the floor. Vanessa turned with irritation still written across her features. Then she recognized him. Her expression changed. Daniel did not seem to notice. He stopped beside Emily and looked once more at the torn seam. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "Who did this?" Emily lifted her eyes to his, and something in her composed expression softened for the first time that afternoon. By 7:30 that evening, the rain had finally softened, leaving the streets outside Emily and Daniel Carter's home shining beneath the porch lights. Emily stepped into the kitchen carrying 2 grocery bags and found Daniel standing in front of the toaster with the serious expression he usually reserved for quarterly reports. A thin ribbon of smoke curled toward the ceiling. Emily set the bags down. "How many pieces?" Daniel looked at the blackened slice in his hand. "1." Emily glanced at the trash can. 2 pieces of burned toast were already inside. Daniel followed her eyes. 3. She smiled. "You manage a company with thousands of employees. None of them are toast. That explains everything." Daniel laughed, and the sound changed the room. At 36, he had learned how to walk into a boardroom and make people listen without raising his voice. Business magazines described him as disciplined, private, and relentlessly focused. At home, he regularly forgot where he left his keys. Emily found them beside the coffee maker while putting away the groceries. "Looking for these?" Daniel checked his pockets, then gave her a resigned smile. "I was going to find them eventually. Before or after you replaced the car?" She placed the keys in his palm. He closed his fingers around them, then gently caught her hand before she could turn away. "How was your shift?" "Normal." Margaret's still pretending she does not need new booths. "Of course. And you are still pretending booth 7 does not lean 3 inches toward the window. It has character. It has structural opinions." Emily laughed and reached up to straighten his tie. Daniel had loosened it after work, leaving the knot slightly crooked. It was one of the small rituals that had survived every change in their lives. He could afford tailored suits, drivers, private dining rooms, and houses larger than the apartment where Emily had once counted quarters for laundry. Yet some evenings still ended with burned toast, misplaced keys, and 2 people standing barefoot in a kitchen deciding whether leftovers sounded better than takeout. Daniel watched her adjust the knot. "You know you do not have to work there anymore." Emily's hands paused. He said it gently. He always did. "I know. I am not asking you to quit." "I know that too." Daniel leaned against the counter. "I just wonder sometimes if you feel obligated to stay because of what Margaret did for you." Emily considered the question. Outside, tires whispered over the wet street. "Maybe part of me does," she said. "But it is not debt." She glanced toward the simple navy apron folded over the back of a kitchen chair, washed and ready for her next shift. "When I started there, I spent every day worrying about what I did not have. Enough money. Enough experience. Enough certainty. Margaret never treated me like I was missing something. She gave me work and expected me to do it well. That mattered." Daniel nodded. He knew this story, but he never interrupted when she told it. "Maple and Maine reminds me that a job can be more than what it pays," Emily continued. "It can be the place where someone gives you a chance before you know how to give yourself one." Daniel looked at her for a moment. "So Tuesdays stay." "Tuesdays stay." He smiled. "Then I surrender." That was suspiciously easy. "I am learning." Emily kissed his cheek, then opened the refrigerator. "You can prove it by helping with dinner." "I thought I already made toast." "You made evidence." The next morning, Daniel left early for a meeting downtown. Emily stood at the front door and fixed his tie again because somehow it had gone crooked between the kitchen and the hallway. "Big meeting?" she asked. "Potential expansion partner." "Nervous?" "Never." Emily raised an eyebrow. Daniel smiled. "A little." She handed him his keys before he could forget them. "Good luck." He touched his forehead lightly to hers. "Have a good shift tomorrow." "I always do." Neither of them knew that by lunchtime the following day, a woman named Vanessa Whitmore would walk into Maple and Maine carrying frustration from a life Emily knew nothing about. Neither knew that Noah Bennett would make one small mistake, or that an Old Navy apron would soon mean more than anyone in that diner could understand. For now, Daniel stepped into the morning. Emily closed the door behind him, and their ordinary life continued exactly as they loved it. 2 days earlier, Emily Carter arrived at Maple and Maine at 6:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before her shift began. The neighborhood was barely awake. Delivery trucks hummed along the wet street. The bakery across the block had just turned on its lights, and inside the diner the first pot of coffee filled the room with a familiar warmth. Emily tied her faded navy apron around her waist and slipped 2 pins into the front pocket. Margaret Collins looked up from the register. "You know I bought new aprons last month." Emily glanced down at the old fabric. "This one still works. That thing has survived longer than some marriages." Emily smiled. "Then it deserves respect." Margaret shook her head and returned to counting the drawer. 10 years earlier, Emily had walked through that same door with $29 in her checking account and rent due in 4 days. She had been 19, tired, and trying very hard not to look frightened. College had been postponed because life had presented bills before opportunities. Maple and Main was the 4th restaurant where she asked for work that morning. Margaret had been pouring coffee when Emily handed her a nearly empty resume. "Any serving experience?" Margaret asked. "Not really." "Can you show up on time?" "Yes." "Can you listen when somebody teaches you something?" "Yes." Margaret studied her for a moment, then reached beneath the counter and handed her a navy apron. "No pity. No speech about giving the poor girl a chance. Just work." "Table 3 needs coffee," she said. That simple sentence had meant more to Emily than Margaret probably understood. Someone expected something from her. Someone believed she could learn. On Emily's 3rd shift, one of the apron buttons came loose. Margaret repaired it during lunch with dark blue thread from a sewing kit beneath the register. "Everybody deserves a place to start," she had said. Emily remembered those words every time her fingers touched that button. Years passed. The overdue rent disappeared. So did the careful calculations in grocery store aisles and the nights when she wondered whether $20 could somehow last until Friday. Her life became comfortable in ways her 19-year-old self could never have imagined. Still, every Tuesday, Emily returned to Maple and Main. Most customers assumed she needed the paycheck. Emily never corrected them. She did not wear expensive jewelry to work. Her wedding ring was simple, and she often slipped it into the zippered pocket inside her purse before washing glasses. She did not talk about the house she returned to after closing or the man waiting there. At Maple and Main, she was not someone's wife or someone people recognized because of a last name. She was Emily. She remembered regular customers' coffee orders. She covered shifts when someone had a sick child. She showed new employees where Margaret hid the extra napkins. That morning, Noah Bennett arrived 5 minutes early for his first full week and nearly dropped an entire stack of clean menus. Emily caught the top half before they slid to the floor. "Sorry," he said quickly. "Do not apologize for something that did not happen." Noah gave a nervous smile. Emily handed the menus back. "You will be fine." The brass bell above the entrance rang as the first customers arrived. Emily lifted the coffee pot and headed toward the front booths. Morning sunlight stretched across the worn floor, touching the faded apron at her waist. Nobody entering the diner looked twice at it. Nobody had any reason to. To them, it was only a uniform. To Emily, it was proof that where a person begins does not have to decide where they belong. The following Tuesday began quietly enough. By 11:30, Maple and Main had settled into its familiar lunch rhythm. Plates moved through the kitchen window. Coffee poured. The old brass bell chimed every few minutes as office workers and neighborhood regulars escaped the humid August afternoon. Emily was carrying iced tea to booth 5 when Vanessa Whitmore entered. She wore a cream jacket despite the heat, dark sunglasses, and a watch that caught the light each time she moved her wrist. Nothing about her appearance bothered Emily. She had served people wearing $10 shirts and $10,000 watches, and hunger sounded remarkably similar from both. What Emily noticed instead was Vanessa's expression. Tight, distracted, tired in a way expensive clothes could not hide. Vanessa ended a phone call before reaching the hostess stand. "I said I cannot deal with this right now," she said into the phone. A pause followed. Something in her face softened for half a second. "Tell your mother whatever you want." The call ended. Vanessa stared at the dark screen before slipping the phone into her purse. When Emily approached, the softness was gone. "Table for one?" Emily asked. "Somewhere quiet." "Of course." Emily led her toward booth 7. Vanessa looked at the seat, then toward the window. "Not here. Too much sun." Emily moved her to booth 9. "This table rocks." Emily tested it with her fingertips. "Barely. I can fix that." I would rather have a table that does not need fixing. Emily nodded and guided her to table 12. Vanessa sat without thanking her. Emily placed a menu down. Can I start you with something to drink? Unsweetened iced tea. Lemon. Very little ice. Absolutely. Emily walked toward the beverage station, where Noah was arranging silverware. Is she mad? He whispered. Emily glanced back. Vanessa was already checking her phone. Maybe. At us. Probably not. Noah frowned. Then why does it feel like she is? Emily placed lemon slices beside the glass. Sometimes people bring a bad day through the door with them. What do we do? Do not carry it for them. When Emily returned, Vanessa took one sip. There is too much ice. Emily looked at the glass. 6 cubes floated near the lemon. I will bring another. The second glass was acceptable. The soup was not hot enough. Then it was too hot to eat immediately. Vanessa asked for dressing on the side after the salad arrived, although Emily had confirmed the order twice. Each request remained small enough to sound reasonable alone. Together, they formed a steady pressure. Emily handled everyone the same way. Certainly. I can take care of that. I will be right back. Margaret noticed from behind the register. Emily gave her a small nod. She had dealt with difficult customers before. Most people did not enter restaurants planning to be cruel. They arrived carrying something invisible. A disappointing meeting. A frightened phone call. A marriage ending quietly. A child who no longer answered. None of those things excused disrespect. But Emily had learned that understanding the source of someone's anger sometimes helped her avoid becoming part of it. Vanessa's phone rang again. This time she answered immediately. Claire. Her voice changed. Honey, please do not hang up. Silence. Vanessa looked toward the window. I know you are angry with me. Another pause. Her shoulders lowered. I am trying. The call ended before Vanessa finished. She remained still for several seconds, staring at nothing. Emily approached with fresh coffee for the neighboring table and quietly passed without asking whether Vanessa needed anything. She understood that some moments deserved privacy, even in public. 10 minutes later, Noah came from the kitchen carrying 2 water glasses. A family at table 11 had asked for refills. He was concentrating so carefully on keeping the tray level that he nearly missed a chair pushed slightly into the aisle. He corrected himself in time, but one glass tilted. A small ribbon of water spilled onto the floor and splashed near the leg of Vanessa's table. Her purse sat several inches away. Noah froze. I am so sorry, ma'am. Vanessa looked down at the water, then at her purse, then at Noah. Something from the phone call was still burning behind her eyes. Are you serious? I will clean it right away. Do you have any idea what this bag costs? Noah looked at the dry purse. No, ma'am. Of course you do not. Emily heard the change in Vanessa's voice from across the room. She set down the coffee pot. Noah reached for a towel, his hands suddenly less steady than before. Vanessa leaned back and looked at him as though his mistake had confirmed something she already believed about the world. Maybe they should hire people who know what they are doing. Emily crossed the diner without rushing. She stopped beside Noah and handed him a clean towel. I have this. Then she looked at Vanessa. Her expression remained calm. Her voice remained soft, but something in it had changed. He apologized, ma'am. Vanessa turned toward her. I was not speaking to you. Emily held her gaze. I know. That evening, Emily came home to the smell of burned toast and found Daniel standing in the kitchen with the expression of a man facing a problem no business degree had prepared him to solve. A dark slice rested on a plate beside the toaster. Emily set her purse on the counter and looked into the trash can. 2 more slices were already there. How many? She asked. Daniel loosened his charcoal tie. 1. Emily looked at the trash. He followed her eyes. 3. She smiled. You oversee thousands of employees. None of them require me to understand this toaster. It has 2 buttons. Exactly. Too many variables. His smile came easily around her. Outside their windows, evening traffic moved through streets still shining from an earlier rain. Their home was comfortable, larger and quieter than anything Emily had imagined at 19, but the kitchen rarely felt grand. Grocery lists stayed beneath a magnet on the refrigerator. Daniel left coffee mugs beside the sink. Emily kept coupons she no longer needed because some habits survived long after necessity disappeared. She began unpacking groceries while Daniel searched the counter. What did you lose? Nothing. Your keys are beside the coffee maker. He turned. They were exactly where she said. I knew that. Of course. Emily handed them to him, then reached up and straightened his tie. Somehow Daniel could sit across from investors discussing deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars without appearing uncertain, yet his tie rarely survived an entire day without shifting slightly crooked. Emily had been fixing it for years. Daniel watched her fingers adjust the knot. How was Maple and Maine? Quiet. Noah survived another shift without dropping the silverware. A major achievement. Margaret says the same thing about you remembering your keys. Margaret and I need stronger boundaries. Emily laughed. Daniel caught her hand before she stepped away and pressed a gentle kiss to her fingers. You know you do not have to work there anymore. Emily looked at him. There was no judgment in his voice. There never was. I know. I am not asking you to stop. I know that too. Daniel leaned against the counter. I just want to make sure you are still going because you want to, not because you think you owe Margaret something. Emily glanced toward the navy apron folded neatly over the back of a chair. It is not a debt. Then what is it? She considered the question. A reminder. Daniel waited. He had learned early in their marriage that Emily did not need someone to finish her thoughts for her. When I started there, everything in my life felt temporary, she said. My apartment, my plans, even college. I was always calculating what I could postpone until the next paycheck. Margaret never treated me like a charity case. She gave me a schedule and expected me to show up. Emily smiled faintly. That was exactly what I needed. Daniel nodded. A place where nobody rescued you. A place where somebody trusted me to rescue myself. The words settled quietly between them. Daniel looked toward the old apron. So Tuesdays stay. Tuesdays stay. Then I will stop asking. Emily raised an eyebrow. Forever. Let us not make unreasonable promises. She laughed and opened the refrigerator. Help me with dinner. I already made toast. You made charcoal. The next morning, Daniel was leaving before 7 for a meeting downtown when Emily stopped him at the front door. His tie was crooked again. She fixed it without a word. Important meeting? She asked. Potential expansion partner. Nervous. No, Emily gave him a look. Daniel sighed. Slightly. She placed his keys in his hand before he could forget them. Good luck. He touched his forehead gently to hers. See you tonight. Do not burn dinner. No promises. Emily watched him walk toward the waiting car, then closed the door with a smile. Their life contained wealth now, but the things holding it together had almost nothing to do with money. A crooked tie, forgotten keys, burned toast, a Tuesday shift neither of them needed, and the quiet certainty that neither had ever asked the other to become someone different in order to be loved. Emily held Vanessa's gaze for one quiet second, then crouched beside Noah and pressed the clean towel into his hand. Wipe the floor first, she said. Someone could slip. Noah nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. Excuse me. We are not finished. Emily stood again. Your purse is dry, ma'am. The floor will be dry in a moment. That is not the point. Then what is? Vanessa seemed surprised by the question. Around them, lunch continued, but more softly now. Silverware touched plates. A coffee cup settled onto a saucer. Nobody openly stared, yet everyone seemed to be listening. Vanessa glanced toward Noah. The point is that people should know how to do the jobs they are paid to do. Noah's shoulders tightened. Emily noticed. He is 17, she said. It is his first week. Then perhaps he should have been trained before being allowed near customers. He was trained. Clearly not well. Margaret looked up from the register, but Emily gave her the smallest shake of her head. She could handle this. Vanessa picked up her purse and inspected the bottom even though not a drop had touched it. This cost more than he probably makes in 6 months. Emily's expression did not change. That does not make him worth less than the bag. Vanessa slowly lowered the purse. I did not say it did. No, but he heard you. Noah stopped wiping for half a second. Vanessa's face hardened. You are being remarkably judgmental for someone whose job is to bring me lunch. Emily absorbed the words without reacting. She had heard versions of them before. Some people believed service meant obedience, that a uniform erased boundaries, that a tip purchased not only food and attention, but silence. Emily had learned otherwise. My job is to serve your table, she said. It is not to agree when someone is being treated poorly. Vanessa gave a short laugh. Poorly? I asked for basic competence. He made one mistake and apologized. And I am allowed to be upset. You are. Emily nodded. You are not entitled to make him feel small because you are upset. The sentence landed gently. That made it heavier. Vanessa's phone lit up on the table. Claire. For an instant, the anger in her eyes disappeared. Her hand moved toward the phone, then stopped. The call ended unanswered. When Vanessa looked back at Emily, the wall had returned. You know nothing about me. That is true. Then stop pretending you do. I am not. Emily's voice softened. I only know what happened at this table. Noah finished drying the floor and stood with the towel folded in his hands. I really am sorry, ma'am. Vanessa looked at him, but whatever answer might have come was interrupted by Margaret approaching from behind the counter. Everything all right here? She asked. Emily answered first. The spill is cleaned up. Margaret studied Emily's face, then Noah's, then Vanessa's untouched purse. Good. Vanessa pushed her salad away. Actually, no. Everything is not all right. Your waitress has been lecturing me in front of the entire restaurant. Margaret turned toward Emily. Did you? Emily did not look away from Vanessa. I asked her not to humiliate Noah. Margaret was silent for a moment. Then I suppose she asked exactly what I would have asked. Vanessa stared at her. Unbelievable. She reached for her purse. Perhaps that is why this place looks like it has not been updated since 1998. Margaret glanced around the diner. 1996, mostly. A customer near the window hid a smile behind his coffee cup. Vanessa noticed. Color rose in her cheeks. Emily could see the embarrassment turning into something sharper, something less reasonable. She stepped closer to the table, not to challenge Vanessa, but to lower the temperature. Ma'am, nobody here is trying to embarrass you. Let me bring your check, and we can end this quietly. Vanessa stood. Do not tell me what we are going to do. I am offering you a way to leave without this becoming something bigger. You think I am the problem? Emily paused. I think you came in carrying a problem that started somewhere else. Vanessa went completely still. Emily immediately knew the words had reached a place she had not intended to touch. Her eyes flicked toward the silent phone. Claire. Vanessa followed the glance. Do not, she said. I was not going to say anything. You already have. Then I am sorry. Emily meant it. Vanessa did not hear the apology. She heard pity, even though none had been offered. Her hand tightened around the strap of her purse. You stand there in that cheap uniform and look at me as though you understand my life. Emily glanced down at the faded navy apron, then back up. No, ma'am. I understand mine. Noah watched from beside the table. Margaret stopped moving. Vanessa stepped closer, her frustration no longer about water, service, or a purse. Then stay in it, she said quietly. Emily's face remained calm. I intend to. The following Tuesday arrived warm and gray, with heavy August clouds hanging over the neighborhood and the smell of rain already in the air. By 11:30, Maple and Maine had settled into its usual lunch rhythm. Coffee poured. Plates moved through the kitchen window. The brass bell above the entrance chimed every few minutes as office workers, retirees, and neighborhood regulars filled the booths. Emily was carrying 2 glasses of iced tea toward table 5 when Vanessa Whitmore walked in. She wore a cream jacket, dark sunglasses, and a polished watch that caught the light when she lifted her phone. Her clothes were expensive, but that was not what Emily noticed. She noticed the tension in Vanessa's face. The woman was finishing a call before she had even reached the hostess stand. I cannot do this right now, Vanessa said into the phone. She listened for several seconds. Her expression shifted. For one brief moment, the sharpness disappeared. Claire, please. Just talk to me. The line went silent. Vanessa looked at the screen, then slipped the phone into her purse. By the time Emily approached, the softness was gone. Good morning. Table for 1. Emily asked. Somewhere quiet. Emily led her toward booth 7. Vanessa looked at the sunlight coming through the window. Not here. Of course. Booth 9 came next. Vanessa pressed one hand against the table. It moves. I can fix that in a second. I would prefer one that does not need fixing. Emily moved her to table 12 without comment. Can I start you with something to drink? Unsweetened iced tea. Lemon. Very little ice. Absolutely. At the beverage station, Noah Bennett was carefully rolling silverware into napkins. He glanced toward Vanessa. Is she upset? He whispered. Emily dropped a lemon wedge into the glass. Probably. Did we do something? No. Then why does it feel like we did? Emily looked at him and smiled faintly. Sometimes people bring their bad day through the door with them. What are we supposed to do with it? Nothing. Do not carry what does not belong to you. She brought Vanessa the tea. Vanessa took one sip. Too much ice. 6 cubes floated in the glass. Emily simply nodded. I will replace it. The second glass stayed. Then the soup was not warm enough. Emily replaced it. The new bowl was too hot to eat immediately. The salad arrived with dressing on the side exactly as requested, but Vanessa decided she wanted a different dressing. None of the complaints were extraordinary by themselves. Together, they formed a steady rhythm of dissatisfaction. Emily answered each one with the same calm professionalism. Margaret watched from behind the register and raised an eyebrow. Emily gave her a small nod. She had this. Then Vanessa's phone rang again. Her eyes dropped to the screen. Claire. She answered before the second ring. Honey. The words sounded different from everything else she had said that afternoon. Softer. Almost uncertain. Please do not hang up. Emily passed nearby carrying a coffee pot. Vanessa stared through the window while listening. I know you are angry with me. A pause. I know I missed it. Another pause. I said I am trying. The call ended. Vanessa kept the phone against her ear for another second before lowering it. Emily continued walking. She did not ask questions. Some sadness deserved the courtesy of not being observed too closely. 10 minutes later, Noah came from the kitchen carrying 2 glasses of water for table 11. He moved carefully, concentrating on the tray. A chair had been left slightly farther into the aisle than usual. Noah stepped around it, corrected his balance, and 1 glass tilted. A little water splashed onto the floor beside Vanessa's table. Her purse remained several inches away and completely dry. Noah stopped immediately. I am so sorry, ma'am. Vanessa looked at the water, then at her purse, then at Noah. Are you serious? I will clean it right away. Do you have any idea what this bag costs? Noah swallowed. No, ma'am. Of course you do not. Emily heard the change in Vanessa's voice from across the diner. She placed the coffee pot on the counter and walked over. Noah had already reached for a towel, his face turning red as nearby customers glanced toward him. Vanessa continued before he could kneel. Maybe this restaurant should hire people who actually know what they are doing. Emily stopped beside Noah and handed him the towel. Take care of the floor. I have the table. Noah nodded. Emily turned toward Vanessa. Her posture remained relaxed. Her voice remained quiet. He apologized, ma'am. Vanessa looked up at her. I was not speaking to you. Emily held her gaze without anger. I know. Emily's answer did not calm Vanessa. It seemed to make the silence around them heavier. For several seconds, Vanessa stood with one hand resting on her purse, her eyes fixed on the woman in the faded navy apron. You intend to stay in your life? She asked. Then perhaps you should remember what that life is. Margaret stepped forward, but Emily gently lifted a hand. It is all right. Vanessa laughed without humor. There, that expression again. Calm, superior, as though you were somehow above all of this. I do not think I am above anyone. Really? Because you have spent the last 10 minutes judging me. Emily shook her head. I asked you to stop embarrassing a 17-year-old boy over spilled water. Noah stood near the service station now, holding the damp towel. He looked as if he wished he could disappear into the kitchen. Emily noticed and softened her voice. Noah, please check table 11. They are still waiting for their refills. He hesitated. But I should help. You are helping. Go take care of your table. Noah nodded and left. Emily had given him something simple to do, something normal. A way to return to being an employee learning his job instead of a mistake everyone was watching. Vanessa followed him with her eyes. You protect people too much. Maybe. The real world will not. Emily glanced toward the rain beginning to dot the front windows. Then the real world could stand to improve. Vanessa's mouth tightened. People like you always have an answer. People like me? Vanessa looked at the apron, the order pad in Emily's pocket, the inexpensive shoes designed for long shifts. People who think being ordinary makes them morally superior. Emily absorbed the words. I have never thought ordinary was an insult. That answer landed differently. Vanessa looked away first. Her phone lit again on the table. No call this time. A message. She read it quickly, and whatever she saw seemed to deepen the frustration already pressing behind her eyes. She turned the screen face down. Bring my check. Of course. Emily moved toward the register. Margaret met her halfway. I can ask her to leave. She is already leaving. Emily. Margaret lowered her voice. You do not have to absorb everything just because you can stay calm. Emily looked back at Vanessa. I know. She printed the check, placed it inside a small black folder, and returned to the table. Whenever you are ready. Vanessa opened it, glanced at the amount, then pulled out a credit card. Emily reached for the folder. Do not. Emily stopped. Ma'am, do not stand there pretending this did not bother you. It did bother me. Vanessa seemed caught off guard. Then why are you acting like this? Emily looked down at her apron. Her thumb brushed the old button Margaret had sewn years earlier. Because being upset does not require me to become unkind. For the first time, Vanessa had no immediate reply. A quiet second passed. Then a customer near the window shifted in his seat, and Vanessa noticed several people still watching. Embarrassment returned to her face. This is ridiculous, she muttered. She stood quickly and reached for her purse. The strap caught briefly against the edge of the table. Emily instinctively moved to help. I have it, Vanessa said sharply. Emily stepped back. All right. But Vanessa's attention had fallen again on the faded apron. You stand there acting so dignified in something that probably costs $20. Emily's eyes lowered to the fabric. Probably less. And you expect me to believe none of this matters to you? The price does not. Vanessa gave a bitter smile. Easy thing to say when you have never had anything worth losing. Emily looked at her then. Really looked at her. You do not know what I have lost. Vanessa's expression flickered, but pride closed the opening almost immediately. And you do not know what I have. You are right. Emily nodded. That is why I never judged you by your purse. Vanessa stared at her. Rain began tapping harder against the glass. The diner seemed smaller somehow, every sound sharper. Vanessa reached toward the black check folder on the table, but her hand caught the loose edge of Emily's apron as Emily turned to give her room. For a second, both women stopped. Vanessa could simply have released it. Emily expected her to. Instead, frustration took over where judgment should have stopped it. Vanessa pulled the fabric away from her path with a sharp, impatient motion. The old seam gave way with a dry tearing sound. Not loud, but loud enough. A button dropped. It struck the floor, spun beneath table 7, and rolled in a slow circle before stopping beside Vanessa's cream-colored heel. Nobody spoke. Emily looked down at the torn seam. Her fingers touched the empty place where the button had been. And suddenly she was 19 again, watching Margaret thread a needle beneath the register. Everybody deserves a place to start. Emily bent down and picked up the button. When she stood, her eyes were bright, but her voice remained steady. You can tear an apron, she said softly, but you cannot decide what the person wearing it is worth. Then the brass bell above the entrance rang. Emily held Vanessa's gaze for a moment, then turned toward Noah. The teenager was still kneeling beside the table with the towel in his hand, even though the small spill was already gone. His face remained red. Noah, Emily said gently, table 11 still needs those water refills. He looked up. I can stay and help. You are helping. Go take care of your table. He hesitated, then nodded. Emily had given him something more useful than reassurance. She had given him a way back into the ordinary rhythm of his job. Noah collected 2 fresh glasses and walked toward the kitchen. Vanessa watched him leave. You protect him too much. Emily turned back. It is his first week. That is exactly my point. The world will not protect him because he is new. Maybe not. Emily picked up the empty soup bowl from Vanessa's table. But teaching someone does not require humiliating them. Vanessa folded her arms. You really cannot stop, can you? Stop what? Acting as though you are somehow better than me. Emily paused. I do not think I am better than you. You have been judging me since I walked in. No, I have been serving you since you walked in. The answer was simple. No edge. That seemed to bother Vanessa more than anger would have. You changed my table 3 times. Emily continued. You replaced my tea. Yes. You replaced my soup. Yes. You brought a different dressing. Yes. Emily set the bowl onto her tray. And I would have kept doing my job without complaint. Until you decided to lecture me. Until Noah made a mistake, and you made it personal. Vanessa looked toward the front windows. Rain had begun tapping lightly against the glass. Her phone rested beside her purse, dark now. Emily could still remember the softness in Vanessa's voice when she had answered Claire. Honey, please do not hang up. There was pain somewhere beneath all this anger. Emily could see it. But pain did not become permission simply because nobody else could see where it came from. You know nothing about the real world, Vanessa said. Emily almost smiled, though there was nothing amusing in the moment. I know enough. Vanessa's eyes moved over Emily's uniform. The practical black shoes. The inexpensive white shirt. The faded apron tied at her waist. Really? Because from where I am standing, your world looks very small. Margaret stopped sorting receipts behind the register. Emily heard it, but she did not turn. Small is not the same as meaningless. Vanessa gave a quiet laugh. That sounds like something people say when they have never had choices. For the first time, Emily felt the words touch an old place inside her. 19 years old. $29 in the bank. For days until rent. Standing in a diner pretending she was not afraid. She could have told Vanessa everything. She could have described the cold apartment, the postponed tuition, the grocery totals calculated. Twice before checkout. She could have explained that she knew exactly what it meant to have very few choices. Instead, Emily placed the bowl on a nearby service cart. Everyone has a life you cannot see from across a table. Vanessa's expression tightened. Do not give me philosophy with my lunch. Then I will bring your check. Emily turned, but Vanessa spoke again. Wait. Emily stopped. Vanessa looked almost surprised that she had. Does none of this bother you? Of course it bothers me. Then why are you so calm? Emily considered her answer. Because being upset does not require me to become unkind. The words settled between them. Vanessa glanced away. Her phone lit up again. Claire. She reached toward it, but the screen went dark before she answered. Something changed in her face. Regret, perhaps, or loneliness. It lasted only a second. Then she looked at Emily, and the wall returned. You stand there in a cheap apron acting like dignity pays the bills. Emily touched the old button near her waist. Margaret had sewn it there 10 years earlier with dark blue thread and steady hands. No, Emily said softly. Dignity is what you try not to lose while you are paying them. Vanessa stared at her. Nearby, a spoon touched a saucer with a small metallic sound. Emily reached for the check folder. She wanted the moment to end quietly. But Vanessa was no longer looking at the bill. She was looking at Emily's apron, as though that faded piece of fabric represented everything she had decided about the woman wearing it. The brass bell rang twice as the front door opened, and a breath of cool rain moved through Maple and Main. Daniel Carter stepped inside, closing his black umbrella before setting it beside the entrance. He had expected to find Emily finishing another ordinary Tuesday shift. Instead, he found half the diner silent. His eyes moved across the room and stopped on her. The torn navy apron. The button closed inside her hand. Noah standing near the service station. Margaret watching from behind the register. Then Vanessa. Daniel crossed the room without hurrying. Who did this? He asked. Emily met his eyes. The tension in her face softened, but only slightly. Daniel. Vanessa turned toward him, and recognition arrived almost immediately. She had seen his photograph in business magazines and at charity events. Daniel Carter, founder of Carter Hospitality Group, the man whose company owned hotels and restaurants across several states. Her posture changed before she seemed aware of it. Mr. Carter, she said, I did not realize you were here. Daniel did not look at her. He stepped closer to Emily. Are you all right? I am fine. His eyes dropped to the torn seam. That does not look fine. Emily opened her palm and showed him the old button. Daniel recognized it. He had watched her sew it back on more than once over the years, refusing every suggestion that she replace the apron. His jaw tightened. What happened? Vanessa answered before Emily could. There was a misunderstanding. Daniel finally looked at her. A misunderstanding? Your waitress became involved in something that did not concern her. The words left Vanessa's mouth before she could reconsider them. Daniel's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. My waitress. Vanessa hesitated. I mean the restaurant's waitress. Daniel glanced at Emily, and despite everything, Emily almost smiled. Vanessa noticed the exchange. Confusion replaced certainty. You know her? She asked. Daniel looked at Emily for one quiet second before answering. She is my wife. Nothing moved. Even Vanessa seemed to forget to breathe. Noah's eyes widened. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, as if a secret she had known would eventually surface had finally chosen its moment. Vanessa stared at Emily. Her gaze moved from the inexpensive shoes to the white shirt, then to the torn apron, searching for some sign she had missed. Your wife? Yes. Vanessa's face lost color. I had no idea. Emily looked at her. I know. If I had known, I would never have. Vanessa stopped. The unfinished sentence hung between them. Daniel heard it too. Never have what? He asked. Vanessa swallowed. This was not supposed to happen. Daniel reached for his phone. Margaret, I would like a copy of the security footage. Emily gently touched his wrist. No, Daniel looked at her. Emily, please. She damaged your property and humiliated you in front of a room full of people. And I can speak for myself. Daniel's hand lowered immediately. That was the difference between protection and possession, and he had always understood it. Emily turned back to Vanessa. You said you would not have done this if you had known. Vanessa looked uncomfortable. Obviously. Known what? Who you were. Emily's eyes remained steady. You knew who I was. Vanessa frowned. No, I did not. My name is Emily. I work here on Tuesdays. I was serving your lunch. You knew enough. Vanessa glanced at Daniel as though his presence might somehow provide an easier answer. It did not. Emily continued softly. If he had not walked through that door, would tearing my apron have been acceptable? That is not what I meant. If my husband were a mechanic, would it have been different? Vanessa said nothing. If I lived in a studio apartment and counted every dollar before payday, would I deserve less respect? The diner remained silent, but Emily no longer seemed aware of anyone else. 5 minutes ago, you thought I had very little. That is the woman you owe an apology to, not the woman standing beside Daniel Carter. Vanessa looked down at the floor. Daniel watched his wife, and the anger in his face slowly gave way to something quieter. Pride. Not because Emily had revealed who she was, but because she had refused to let his name become the reason anyone respected her. Noah stepped closer to Margaret. Vanessa's eyes found him. For the first time, she seemed to see the 17-year-old rather than the mistake he had made. She began, then stopped. Emily waited. No triumph. No smile. Just patience. Vanessa picked up her purse. I need to leave. Emily nodded. Then leave. Vanessa took 2 steps toward the door before Emily spoke once more. But when you think about what happened here, do not remember who my husband is. Vanessa stopped. Emily closed her fingers around the old button. Remember who you thought I was. Emily let her fingers rest against the old button for one quiet second. The faded thread beneath it had survived hundreds of shifts. Countless wash cycles, spilled coffee, hurried breakfasts, and 10 years of ordinary work. Vanessa was still watching her, but something in the woman's expression had changed. The anger remained. So did the embarrassment. Yet beneath both was the first trace of uncertainty. You think you know everything about people because you serve them coffee? Vanessa asked. Emily shook her head. No. Serving people taught me how little I usually know about them. Margaret stopped sorting receipts behind the counter. Noah stood near the service station, pretending to organize glasses while listening. Emily continued. Someone can walk in wearing an expensive coat and be having the worst day of her year. Someone else can count quarters for lunch and still leave the biggest tip they can afford. You cannot always see what a person is carrying. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward her phone. Claire's name was no longer glowing on the screen, but the silence it had left behind seemed to remain. Do not talk about things you do not understand. I'm not talking about your daughter. Vanessa stiffened. Emily's voice stayed gentle. I'm talking about all of us. For a moment, Vanessa said nothing. Then she looked down at Emily's apron. You make it sound so simple. It is not simple. Emily touched the button again. Being decent when you are angry can be difficult. It is still your responsibility. The words landed without accusation. Vanessa looked toward the window where the first drops of rain were beginning to streak the glass. You have no idea what kind of day I have had. You are right. My daughter barely speaks to me. A business deal I spent 8 months building fell apart this morning. My former husband called to tell me I caused both problems. Her voice had grown quieter with every sentence. Then I walked in here, and everything seemed wrong. Emily listened. She did not interrupt. Vanessa gave a bitter little smile. And now a waitress is explaining kindness to me. No, Emily said. A waitress is asking you not to make Noah pay for something he did not do. Vanessa's gaze shifted toward the teenager. Noah immediately looked down. Something passed across her face. Regret came close, then pride pushed it away. He should still be more careful. He should, and tomorrow he probably will be. Emily reached for the check folder. That is what learning looks like. Vanessa exhaled and stood. For half a second, it seemed the moment might end there. She might pay, leave, and carry Emily's words home with her. Then a customer near the window whispered something to his companion. Vanessa heard the whisper, but not the words. Her face tightened again. Shame turned back into defensiveness. Everyone is staring at me because of you. Emily glanced around. They are looking because this became louder than it needed to be. Because you made it a lesson. I tried to end it. By making me look cruel? Emily's expression softened. I cannot control how people interpret what they see. Vanessa reached for her purse. The strap had slipped behind the check folder. Emily stepped aside to give her room, but the narrow space between the table and chair forced them close for a moment. Vanessa's hand brushed against the loose edge of Emily's apron. She looked down at it. The old fabric, the worn pocket, the tiny repaired button. This, Vanessa said quietly, is exactly what I mean. You stand there wearing something worth $20 and act as if none of the things I worked for matter. Emily looked at the apron. I never said they did not matter. You did not have to. Vanessa. It was the first time Emily had used her name. Your success does not offend me. Vanessa looked up. Then what does? The idea that success gives anyone permission to make someone else feel small. Silence returned. Vanessa's fingers were still caught lightly in the edge of the apron. Emily expected her to release it. Instead, Vanessa made an impatient motion to move past her. The fabric pulled. A dry ripping sound crossed the diner. Small. Brief. Final. The old seam opened near Emily's waist. One button dropped onto the floor and spun beneath the table. Noah froze. Margaret stopped moving. Vanessa stared at the torn fabric as though she had only just understood what her frustration had done. Emily slowly looked down. For an instant, the diner disappeared. She saw Margaret 10 years younger, sitting beneath the register with a needle between her fingers. She heard the old words as clearly as if they had been spoken that morning. Everybody deserves a place to start. Emily bent down and picked up the button. When she stood again, her eyes were bright, but her voice was steady. You can damage my uniform, she said. You do not get to decide my worth. Then the brass bell above the entrance rang. Vanessa remained near the door for several seconds after Emily's words reached her. Remember who you thought I was. Rain blurred the street beyond the glass, and the hand holding her purse slowly lowered. She did not turn around. She simply opened the door and walked into the gray afternoon. The brass bell rang once behind her. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. Emily was grateful for that. She looked down at the button in her palm, then at the torn seam hanging from her apron. Daniel stood beside her, still visibly unsettled. You are really going to let her leave? He asked quietly. She already heard what she needed to hear. That does not mean she understood it. Emily closed her fingers around the button. People rarely understand something important the moment it hurts their pride. Daniel looked at his wife for a long second. Then his shoulders relaxed. You always do that. Do what? Make it very difficult for me to stay angry. Emily gave him a tired smile. I did not ask you to stop being angry. No. You just gave me something better to do with it. Across the room, Noah approached slowly. Emily. She turned. I am sorry. Her expression softened immediately. For what? If I had not spilled the water, none of this would have happened. Emily shook her head. Noah, you spilled water. That is all you did. Do not take responsibility for someone else's choices. Margaret came around the counter carrying a small sewing kit. She looked at the torn apron, then at Emily. Some traditions refuse to die. Emily laughed softly. You still have that thing? Of course I do. Margaret placed it on the counter. Daniel picked it up. I can handle this. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Can you sew? Daniel looked at the tiny spool of dark blue thread. I run a hospitality company. That was not my question. For the first time since entering the diner, Daniel laughed. 1 week passed. The following Tuesday, shortly after 2 in the afternoon, the brass bell rang again. Emily looked up from refilling the sugar containers. Vanessa stood inside the doorway. No cream jacket this time. No sunglasses. No sharp impatience. She carried a paper shopping bag with simple rope handles. Margaret noticed her and went still. Noah was wiping booth 9. Vanessa saw him first. Then Emily. May I speak with you? She asked. Emily set down the sugar container. You may. Vanessa approached and placed the bag on the counter. Inside was a new navy apron made from thick fabric, carefully folded, with Emily's name embroidered near the pocket. I wanted to replace what I damaged. Emily touched the fabric, but did not remove it. Thank you. Vanessa waited. But I do not need a better apron. Vanessa's face fell slightly. I thought you might say that. Emily looked toward Noah. Start with him. Vanessa followed her gaze. Noah stopped wiping the table. For several seconds, she seemed tempted to retreat. Then she walked toward him. Noah. He straightened. Yes, ma'am. Vanessa took a breath. Last week, You made a small mistake. You apologized immediately, and I chose to make you feel ashamed anyway. Noah said nothing. I was angry about things that had nothing to do with you. That does not excuse how I spoke to you. Her voice became quieter. I am sorry. Noah glanced at Emily, then back at Vanessa. Thank you. Vanessa nodded and turned to Margaret. I also owe you an apology. I insulted your restaurant because I was embarrassed by my own behavior. Margaret studied her. That sounds about right. Vanessa almost smiled. I am sorry. Finally, she faced Emily. And I owe you more than an apron. Emily waited. Vanessa looked at the old navy apron around Emily's waist. The torn seam had been repaired. The button was back in place, though Daniel's stitching was noticeably less precise than Margaret's. I kept thinking about what you said, Vanessa continued. If Daniel had not walked in, I would have left believing I was justified. Then I realized that was the worst part. Emily's eyes softened, realizing it matters. Claire told me something similar that night. Vanessa looked down. She said I spend so much time proving I am important that I make everyone around me feel unimportant. The diner remained quiet around them. She was right. Emily did not rush to comfort her. Some truths deserved room. Vanessa looked at the new apron on the counter. What should I do with that? Emily glanced toward the kitchen, where a young new server was struggling to tie a borrowed apron that was much too large. Give it to someone who needs a place to start. Vanessa followed her gaze. This time, her smile was small and genuine. I can do that. Emily reached beneath the counter and took out 2 clean coffee cups. Do you have 5 minutes? Vanessa looked surprised. For what? Emily poured coffee into both cups. To sit down without either of us deciding who the other person is first. Vanessa looked at the cup, then at Emily. I think I have 5 minutes. Emily carried the coffee toward booth 7. Vanessa followed. No audience gathered. No one applauded. And for the first time since she had entered Maple and Maine, Vanessa sat across from Emily not as a customer above a waitress, and not as a woman intimidated by a billionaire's wife, but simply as one human being finally willing to see another. The brass bell rang, and Daniel Carter stepped in from the rain. He closed his black umbrella near the door, expecting nothing more complicated than finding Emily, ordering coffee, and waiting for her shift to end. Then he noticed the silence. His eyes moved across the diner. Noah stood motionless near the service station. Margaret had stopped behind the register. Vanessa remained beside table 12, and Emily stood between them with a torn seam across her faded navy apron and a small button resting in her palm. Daniel's expression changed. He walked toward her. Who did this? Emily looked up, and the tension around her eyes softened. Daniel. Vanessa turned toward him. Recognition came quickly. She had seen his face in business magazines and at charity dinners. Daniel Carter, founder of Carter Hospitality Group, the billionaire whose company operated hotels and restaurants across several states. Vanessa straightened instinctively. Mr. Carter. Daniel barely glanced at her. He stopped beside Emily. Are you all right? I am fine. His eyes dropped to the damaged apron. Emily. She knew that tone. It was not anger exactly. It was the quiet voice he used when something mattered enough that he did not trust himself to speak quickly. Vanessa stepped forward. There has been a misunderstanding. Daniel finally looked at her. What kind of misunderstanding? Your waitress became involved in a situation that did not concern her. Daniel was silent. Emily lowered her eyes for half a second, almost amused despite everything. My waitress? Daniel asked. Vanessa hesitated. The restaurant's waitress. Daniel looked at Emily, then back at Vanessa. Confusion entered Vanessa's face. You know her? Daniel answered without hesitation. She is my wife. The room seemed to lose every remaining sound. Vanessa stared at Emily. Her eyes moved over the practical shoes, the white shirt, the worn apron, as if searching for evidence that should have been obvious earlier. Your wife? Yes. Vanessa's face changed immediately. I had no idea. Emily closed her fingers around the button. I know. If I had known, I would never have. Vanessa stopped. Daniel heard the unfinished sentence. So did Emily. Daniel reached into his jacket for his phone. Margaret, does the diner have security cameras? Daniel. Emily touched his wrist. He looked at her. Please do not. She damaged something that matters to you. Yes. And embarrassed you in front of everyone here. Yes. His voice softened. Then why should I do nothing? Emily held his gaze. I did not ask you to do nothing. I asked you to let me speak. Daniel lowered his hand immediately. He did not look pleased, but he understood. Emily turned toward Vanessa. You said you would not have done this if you had known. Vanessa swallowed. Obviously. Known what? Who you were. You did know who I was. Vanessa frowned. No, I did not. My name is Emily. I work here on Tuesdays. I brought your tea. I replaced your soup. I listened when you complained. You knew enough to decide whether I deserved basic respect. Vanessa looked toward Daniel, perhaps hoping his presence would change the direction of the conversation. Daniel said nothing. Emily continued. If Daniel had not walked through that door, would what happened have been acceptable? That is not what I meant. If my husband fixed cars for a living, would I deserve less respect? Vanessa's lips parted, but no answer came. If I went home tonight to a one-bedroom apartment and worried about rent, would that make it acceptable? Emily's voice never rose. 5 minutes ago, you thought I had almost nothing. That is the woman you owe an apology to, not the woman you see now because you recognize my husband. Vanessa looked down. Noah watched from several feet away. Emily glanced toward him, then back at Vanessa. And he deserves one too. Vanessa's eyes followed hers. For the first time, she seemed to see Noah without seeing the spilled water first. I need to leave, she said quietly. Emily nodded. Then leave. Vanessa picked up her purse and walked toward the entrance. Her hand reached the door before Emily spoke again. Vanessa. She stopped. Emily held the old button between her fingers. When you remember today, do not remember that my husband is a billionaire. Vanessa slowly turned her head. Remember how you treated me when you thought I was only a waitress. Daniel looked at Emily, and the anger in his face gave way to something deeper. He had never loved her because she needed his protection. He loved her because even when she had every opportunity to make another person feel small, she chose not to. Vanessa opened the door. Rain whispered in from the sidewalk. This time, when she stepped outside, nobody in the diner looked triumphant. They simply watched a woman leave carrying a lesson no amount of money could have purchased. 6 months later, Maple and Main still opened before sunrise, still served eggs after noon when Margaret complained loudly enough about it, and still had a booth near the window that leaned slightly to one side. Life had not transformed into a perfect ending because real life rarely did. It simply moved forward, carrying a few people with more understanding than they had before. Noah no longer looked nervous when he carried a tray. He had learned to balance 4 water glasses without staring at them, and whenever a new employee made a mistake, he was usually the first person to say, "You will get it next time." Vanessa came in occasionally. She never asked for special treatment. She learned Noah's name. She asked Margaret how business was going. Sometimes she sat alone with coffee and called Claire, and those conversations gradually lasted longer. Emily never asked what had changed between mother and daughter. She only noticed that Vanessa smiled more often after hanging up. The new navy apron Vanessa had brought was now worn by a college student named Grace, who had started working 3 evenings a week to help cover tuition. Emily still wore the old one. The repaired seam was visible if someone looked closely. Daniel's stitching curved slightly near the pocket because his first attempt at sewing had been far less impressive than his confidence suggested. Emily refused to fix it. It has character, she always said. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Emily finished her shift at 8:15. The last customer left. Noah turned the sign on the door to closed, and Margaret disappeared into the office with the day's receipts. Daniel was already waiting in booth 7. He had arrived 20 minutes earlier, loosened his tie, and ordered 2 coffees without needing to ask who the second one was for. By the time Emily sat across from him, both cups had gone lukewarm. She looked at his. You could have ordered fresh coffee. I could have. But you waited. I have been told that cold coffee builds character. Emily smiled. Who told you that? My wife. She is very wise. Your wife sounds exhausting. Frequently. Emily untied her apron and folded it beside her. Daniel's eyes settled on the repaired seam. I still think I could buy you 1,000 better ones. You could. 10,000. That would be a strange use of money. I am a billionaire. People expect occasional poor decisions. Emily laughed, and Daniel reached across the table for her hand. His thumb moved slowly over her wedding ring. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain tapped against the windows, soft and steady, while the refrigerator behind the counter hummed through the empty diner. Do you ever wish you had stopped coming here? Daniel asked. Emily looked around. At the worn counter. At the coffee machine. At the place where 19-year-old Emily had once stood wondering whether she could make $29 last 4 days. No, she looked back at him. This place remembers me. I remember you. You did not know me then. No, Daniel squeezed her hand. But I know the woman she became. Emily lowered her eyes, smiling. Careful. That almost sounded romantic. Almost. You still burned toast yesterday. One unrelated incident. 3 slices. The toaster remains under investigation. She laughed again, then moved from the opposite side of the booth and sat beside him. Daniel slipped an arm around her shoulders. Emily rested her head against him, listening to the rain and the steady rhythm of his breathing. There had been a time when she believed security meant having enough money that nothing could frighten her. She knew better now. Money could make life easier. It could open doors and soften emergencies. But security was this. A hand reaching for hers after an ordinary day. A man who could have used his power to speak over her, but had loved her enough to step back when she needed to speak for herself. Daniel kissed her forehead. Ready to go home? Emily looked at their 2 unfinished coffees, then at the old apron folded on the table. She intertwined her fingers with his. I already am. Daniel understood. He always seemed to understand the things she meant beneath the things she said. They stayed there another minute before turning off the final light and walking into the rain together. No one passing them on the sidewalk would have known who was a billionaire or who had spent the evening serving coffee. They simply looked like a husband and wife sharing one umbrella, walking close enough that their shoulders touched. And perhaps that was the quiet truth Emily had understood all along. Dignity does not arrive when someone important walks through the door. It was already standing there. For several seconds after Vanessa disappeared into the rain, nobody inside Maple and Main moved. Then the room slowly remembered itself. A fork touched a plate. Someone lifted a coffee cup. Noah returned to the service station, and Margaret quietly straightened the receipts beside the register. Emily remained near table 12 with the old button in her hand. Daniel stood beside her, watching the door. You are really going to let her leave? He asked. Emily looked at him. She heard me. Hearing and understanding are different things. They usually are. Daniel exhaled and glanced at the torn apron. I am still angry. You are allowed to be. That is not helping. A tired smile touched Emily's face. I am not trying to help you stop. Daniel looked at her, then laughed softly despite himself. Noah approached from behind the counter. Emily, I am sorry. She turned immediately. For what? If I had not spilled the water, none of this would have happened. Emily shook her head. You spilled water. You apologized. That is the part you own. She closed her fingers around the button. Do not carry somebody else's choices just because they happened after yours. Noah absorbed that quietly, then nodded. Margaret appeared with the small sewing kit she had kept beneath the register for years. I suppose this thing has another repair left in it. Daniel reached for the kit. I will do it. Margaret looked at him. You know how to sew? I run hotels and restaurants across several states. So that is a no. Emily laughed for the first time since the argument began. Daniel opened the kit anyway. How difficult can one button be? 1 week later, Emily had her answer. The button was secure, but Daniel's dark blue stitches curved unevenly across the repaired seam. She loved them enough to refuse Margaret's offer to redo the work. That Tuesday afternoon, shortly after 2, the brass bell sounded. Emily looked up from filling sugar containers. Vanessa stood just inside the entrance. She wore simple navy slacks and a white blouse. No sunglasses. No sharp expression. In one hand was a paper shopping bag. She saw Emily, then Noah wiping booth 9. May I speak with you? Vanessa asked. Emily set the sugar container down. Yes. Vanessa placed the bag on the counter. Inside was a new navy apron, carefully folded, with Emily's name embroidered above the pocket. I wanted to replace what I damaged. Emily touched the fabric. Thank you. Vanessa waited. But I do not need a better apron. Disappointment crossed Vanessa's face. I thought you might say that. Emily glanced toward Noah. Start with him. Vanessa followed her gaze. Her shoulders tightened. For a moment, Emily thought she might leave again. Instead, Vanessa walked toward the teenager. Noah. He straightened. Yes, ma'am. Vanessa took a breath. Last week you made a small mistake. You apologized immediately, and I chose to make you feel ashamed anyway. Noah listened without moving. I had received bad news that morning. My daughter and I were barely speaking. A business deal had fallen apart. I was angry at people who were not in that restaurant. and I handed that anger to you. She looked directly at him. That was unfair. I am sorry. Noah glanced toward Emily, then back at Vanessa. Thank you for saying that. Vanessa nodded and turned to Margaret. I insulted your restaurant because I was embarrassed by my own behavior. Margaret folded her arms. You did. I am sorry. Margaret studied her for a second. That is a better start. Finally, Vanessa faced Emily. Her eyes settled on the old apron and Daniel's imperfect stitching. I kept thinking about what you said when I left. Emily waited. The worst part was realizing that if Daniel had never walked in, I probably would have gone home believing I was right. Vanessa looked down at her hands. Claire called me that night. She said I spend so much time making sure people know I am important that I make everyone around me feel unimportant. Her voice softened, my own daughter included. Emily did not rush to comfort her. Some truths became smaller when someone tried to soften them too quickly. She was right, Vanessa said. I cannot change that afternoon, but I can stop pretending it showed me nothing. Emily looked toward the new apron. A young college student named Grace had started that morning and was wearing one of Margaret's oversized spares. Give it to her. Vanessa followed Emily's gaze. The new waitress? Her first shift is today. Vanessa looked at the embroidered name on the apron. It has your name on it. Emily smiled. Names can be changed. Vanessa smiled too, faintly. Emily reached for 2 coffee cups. Do you have 5 minutes? For what? Emily poured coffee into both. To sit down without deciding what the other person is worth first. Vanessa looked at her for a long moment. I think I can do that. They sat at booth 7 while afternoon rain began tapping against the windows. No one gathered around them. No one applauded. Daniel was not there. There was no billionaire whose presence could change the meaning of the moment. There were only 2 women, 2 cups of coffee, and an apology that finally mattered because it had arrived when there was nothing left to gain from giving it. 6 months later, Maple and Main still opened before sunrise, still served coffee in thick white mugs, and still had a booth near the window that leaned slightly to one side. Life had not turned perfect after that Tuesday. It had simply continued, which Emily had always believed was the more honest kind of ending. Noah no longer watched every glass on his tray as though one mistake might define him. He had grown comfortable with the lunch rush, learned the regular customers by name, and become the first person to reassure new employees when they struggled. Grace now wore the navy apron Vanessa had brought back. The embroidered name had been removed, leaving a faint outline above the pocket that nobody bothered to hide. Vanessa returned occasionally too. At first, she came only for coffee. Later, she stayed for lunch. She thanked Noah when he refilled her glass. She asked Margaret about the diner instead of criticizing it. More importantly, she began answering Claire's calls before the second ring. Emily never asked for details. Some relationships healed through conversations that belonged only to the people having them. On one rainy Tuesday evening, Emily finished her shift shortly after 8. Margaret was counting receipts in the office. Grace was wiping the counter, and Noah had already turned the sign on the front door to closed. Daniel was waiting in booth 7. He had made a habit of stopping by near the end of Emily's Tuesday shifts, partly because he liked driving home with her, and partly because Maple and Maine served the only coffee he claimed tasted better after it had gone cold. His tie was loosened, his jacket rested beside him, and 2 cups sat on the table. Emily untied her apron and slid into the booth across from him. She took one sip. Cold. Daniel lifted his cup. I waited for you. You could have ordered another. That would have ruined the tradition. Emily smiled. Daniel's gaze fell to the repaired seam of her old apron. His stitching still wandered slightly beside the pocket. Margaret offered to fix that again, did she not? 3 times. And you refused. Every time. Why? Emily folded the apron carefully. Because you repaired it. Daniel looked pleased with himself. So my sewing has sentimental value. Do not get carried away. It still looks terrible. He laughed, and Emily reached across the table to straighten his tie even though they were about to leave. Daniel caught her hand before she pulled away. You know something, he said. I used to think taking care of you meant solving things. Emily looked at him. You do like solving things. I built an entire career around it. His thumb moved gently across her wedding ring. But that day taught me something. What? Sometimes loving you means standing beside you and trusting you to handle your own fight. Emily's expression softened. You did not enjoy that lesson. Not even slightly. But you learned it. I am very teachable. Emily raised an eyebrow. Your toaster would disagree. Daniel laughed again. The sound filled the nearly empty diner, warm and familiar. Emily moved around the table and sat beside him. He slipped an arm around her shoulders, and she rested her head against him. For years, Emily had believed security meant reaching a place where she would never have to worry about money again. She had eventually learned that money could remove many fears, but it could not create the thing she valued most. This could not be purchased. A husband who listened when she said no. A hand that reached for hers after a long shift. Someone who knew where she had started and never treated that beginning as something she should hide. Daniel kissed her forehead. Ready to go home? Emily looked at the diner one last time. The worn counter. Booth 7. The apron folded beside 2 unfinished coffees. Then she intertwined her fingers with his. I already am. Daniel understood what she meant. He always seemed to understand the important things she left unsaid. They turned off the last light and stepped outside beneath one umbrella. Daniel drew Emily closer when the wind shifted the rain toward them. She tucked her arm through his, and they walked toward the car at the same unhurried pace. To anyone passing on the sidewalk, there was nothing remarkable to see. No billionaire, no waitress, just a husband and wife going home together after an ordinary Tuesday, still laughing about burned toast, still choosing each other in the small moments that mattered most. Emily had never needed an important man to walk through a door before she deserved respect. Her dignity had been there all along. Daniel had simply been wise enough to recognize it, love it, and never ask her to trade it for anything.